Do we know who the second quarterback off the board will be after the combine? That and more this week on the couch. Dane Brugler from The Athletic. Dane, we learned at the combine, we're pretty sure who the number one quarterback will be. What about number two? As you left Indianapolis, do you feel like the picture is any clearer?
No, not really. And I think it just comes down to Tua and the durability questions. And that's something that we're not going to know until April 9th, supposedly when he's going to have his personal pro day. Next 5 days will be big. He's supposed to be cleared on March 9th, but there's a big difference between being cleared and then actually going out there and being ready to throw. And so he'll have a month to get ready to be in shape. And with Tua, when you watch him play, he generates so much force from his hips and his throwing motion. He's so twitchy with the way he moves. And I think that there's a lot of optimism, but it's cautious optimism around the league about how he's going to look on April 9th when he's out there throwing. So different teams have different appetites for risk. And, it's not going to be a slam dunk where Tua is going to be the number two quarterback. Now, if he had a clean bill of health, then maybe we're talking about a competition even at number one. I mean, to me, Joe Burrow is the guy, but you never know because Tua is a very talented quarterback. But with the durability questions looming, and it's not just the hip, obviously. He's had stuff with both ankles, the finger, the knee. So, and he's not the biggest guy, 6 foot, 220, and he's a guy that's going to take some hits, needs to be smarter with how he when he's handling the football and, scrambling, making plays outside the pocket. So, I do not think that we have any sense about who's going to be that second quarterback drafted. Herbert, Jordan Love would not shock me at all if either of those two guys is the second quarterback drafted.
And then that makes the whole top 10 difficult to pin down because as those quarterbacks fall into place, these other top-notch blue chip players will fall into place around them. But what is interesting, and something I think that would not have been held as a consensus or even majority view, and by the way, folks, again, Dane Brugler at The Athletic, reason to subscribe alone in this next 2 months leading up to the draft. But I thought it was very notable that you left the door open to someone other than Tua being the number two quarterback and not just Justin Herbert, because already a month ago, people were saying maybe the Bengals prefer him to Burrow, which was, nonsense, but at least it gives you an idea of what people are willing to believe is true. And I don't think many people, even today, are willing to believe that Jordan Love would be the second quarterback off of the board. So what between Love and Herbert, even if we just narrow it down, is it going to be depending on which team takes quarterback two? Is there something still to be determined from pro days? Because both Love and Herbert helped themselves at the combine. What do you think is going to determine who goes first out of those two? How close is it?
It's just going to be a preference, what's your favorite ice cream? And it's something that is going to be different from team to team. I mean, how many people thought that Daniel Jones was going to be the sixth pick last year at this time, going back to last season? It's just, we don't know. At this time, 2 years ago, who was saying Baker Mayfield was going number one overall? It comes down to preference. It comes down to, the team that's drafting. I mean, the Miami Dolphins, they're doing a nice job keeping things close to the vest. I've had some in the league tell me they think it's Tua. Some think it's Herbert. Some told me they think they're going to ride with Fitzpatrick and Rosen and then, go for Fields or Trevor Lawrence in next year's draft. Right. So the Chargers are interesting at number 6. Obviously, moving on from Phillip Rivers, there's an obvious need there for quarterback. But what are they going to do? Are they going to – do they see a quarterback in this draft where, they need to go get him and they feel compelled to do that? So many different variables about who's going to favor who. And, all it comes down to is, which team is picking at the right spot and which quarterback do they prefer. If the Giants don't pick Daniel Jones last year at number 6, where does he go? I mean, we'll never know for sure. Mm-hmm. It's anybody's guess. If Baker Mayfield doesn't go 1 to the Browns, where does he fall? I still think the Jets are taking Sam Darnold 3. Yeah, I still think that the Bills really preferred Josh Allen. It's hard to figure these things out, and we'll never truly know. But with this situation with the Dolphins, with the Chargers, and then you have a few wild cards, the Raiders, the Bucks, the Colts. maybe a trade up situation where they look to get into the top 10 to get one of these quarterbacks. It's something that you hope we feel better about these landing spots as we get closer. But leaving the draft, I don't know how anybody could have any concrete idea about which quarterback is going to land where and when.
And of course, we have all these pieces, starting with Tom Brady. Everybody's just waiting on the edge of their seat to see what Tom Brady's going to do. And then that's going to start another set of dominoes, which may clear this up to some extent. Although if teams are really taking the long view, those are temporary answers out there. Andy Dalton, or if Derek Carr is available via trade or something like that, versus these quarterbacks. But just in your view, for as long as you've been doing this, as long as you've been putting that jeweler's eye on, is Love and Herbert, are they credible as top 10 picks just in an absolute way, sort of across drafts? It makes sense. Or maybe we'll say top 13 because that's where the Colts pick. Have they really cemented themselves in that top half of the first round?
It's debatable. It's tough because with Herbert, he's got everything you want on paper. I mean, you look at the resume and you say, okay, we got to hire this kid. 4-year starter coming off his senior year where, winning the Rose Bowl, winning the Pac-12, 6'6", almost 240 pounds, 4'6" athlete, a great arm, a 4.0 student. And there's just so much going for them that you feel like the floor is high. You feel like you know what you're getting with Justin Herbert. Now with Jordan Love, it's a little bit the opposite, where there's a lot more variables that could throw off the evaluation. And I think it's fascinating. His sophomore year is what put him on the NFL radar. He came into his junior year this past season with first-round grades from NFL teams. If you flip his sophomore year and his junior year, so his junior year, he throws 17 picks and, very up and down. But then, this past year, say he has a sophomore performance where, it's over 30 touchdowns and just really, really flashes against, Michigan State, which is probably his best game tape the last 2 years. If you flip these 2 seasons, all of a sudden Jordan Love is a lock top 10 pick. So I think it's fascinating when you just, go through each one of these guys, and it's a floor ceiling argument. With Jordan Love, the ceiling is so high. The Pat Mahomes comparisons is something that I threw out there back in the summer, because that's what I was hearing from scouts. Scouts were using the words Pat Mahomes when comparing Jordan Love and his skill set and his ability, his upside for scouting purposes. So Justin Herbert is a guy that's been on the radar for a long time. We know what he offers, but I think the intrigue of what Jordan Love can be 3 years from now, that is what has teams really interested. And so you could ask different people around the league and you're going to get different answers. Me personally, I'd lean more towards the floor than the ceiling with these two. So right now, during the season up until the Senior Bowl, I was kind of Love then Herbert. Love just ahead, and now I'm kind of the opposite. Herbert just above Love, just because I'm kind of lean towards the more consistent player. But there is no consensus around the league on these two guys.
And what makes it so tough to pin down? Part of your job, I know the more fun part of your job is just your own personal evaluations, but people want to know, what's this team going to do? How's this draft going to fall out? There's only going to be a certain number of teams that are willing to take a quarterback in the first round. And if they are turned off for whatever reason, Herbert hasn't really integrated a game, or with Love, there's that wide gap between the floor and the ceiling, then you could see these quarterbacks fall. And then you get all kinds of interesting teams into play if they fall past 13 for the Colts and potential for trade ups. And some of that equation, Dane, is if we step back and look at the combine, it seems like, maybe with the exception of Derek Brown, almost everybody in the top 10, 12 of the draft helped themselves. Mm-hmm. So now if you were looking at the equation before the combine, say at number 6, number 7, you're the Chargers, who knows what's going to happen with Russell Okung, and you're weighing one of these tackles against a quarterback, the quarterback might have seemed more compelling. But it seems like now we may see, I wouldn't be shocked if we saw 3 tackles in the top 7, top 8, top 9. And now that becomes a premium position where you don't necessarily have the questions. So tell me a little bit about how these players that were already very strong prospects solidified that view and maybe made the quarterbacks a little less attractive because of the question marks.
Yeah, and I think we have this discussion almost every year when we talk about these quarterbacks because they're so, we don't have Joe Burrows every year where it's just kind of locked in. This should be the top pick. And, we kind of, if you miss on a Joe Burrow, I think you can at least look back in hindsight and say, you know what, it's okay.
Right.
That was worth the risk there. But even, 2 years ago with, Josh Allen and Rosen and Baker and Darnold, I mean, that draft, we had 4 quarterbacks go top 10 and then Lamar Jackson later in the first round. All of those quarterbacks had question marks to them. Baker Mayfield being at the time was the shortest number 1 overall pick at quarterback in a long, long time up until a year later with Kyler Murray. Each one of those you could poke holes in each one of them. So and that was you look at the rest of the players drafted that year and say it was a strong draft. This year, these quarterbacks, they all have holes after Joe Burrow, and so. It just comes down to each team and their appetite for risk. And I think you're right by pointing out that the rest of the players that are being talked about as top 10 players in this draft, they were all fantastic. I mean, you look at Isaiah Simmons. We knew he was going to run well. He was a former track stud growing up before he even played football. And so I don't know that anybody expected a 4.3, but we knew he was going to be outstanding in the workouts. And he lived up to it. He was awesome. Jeff Okudah was terrific. I think you look at tackles, Mekhi Becton moving like he was at 357 pounds, and then Tristan Wirfs, a 4.85 in the 40. The jumps were great. Everything was above average for the tackle position. So, and the tackle position is kind of the same debate with these quarterbacks is kind of, which one, there's no consensus on the order of these tackles. So you talk to one team and it's Becton. You talk to another team, it's Wills. Some will prefer the athleticism of Wirfs. And then Andrew Thomas still has fans around the league as well. So it is really tough to peg at this point, match the teams with the players. And that's to be expected. It's still early March. Teams are still in the process of building their boards and that kind of thing. They haven't gotten to draft meetings yet, or, the draft meetings where they actually feel firm about these guys. That'll come in the coming weeks. So, we're still in the process of feeling out where we know who the top prospects are, but we're still kind of figuring out where they're going to land and where teams might be leaning. But it was interesting that Derek Brown didn't have a great, his numbers did not match up with the tape. I mean, he is an explosive player on tape. You can't watch him and say, he's not an explosive player. He didn't test like an explosive player. So that's an interesting one that you don't think it's going to affect him too much because his tape is just too good. Playing in, and it's not like he played at, Dayton.
Right.
He played in the SEC against top level offensive linemen week in, week out and dominated. So I still think he's safe in the top 10 maybe, but maybe not. Maybe he does fall to the teens. And if that happens, teams are going to be happy to scoop him up. But the talent at the top of this draft, I think to your overall point, definitely is going to make teams think about going quarterback. And the other factor too is teams are already doing their homework on next year's draft in terms of the quarterback position. They're looking at Trevor Lawrence. They're looking at Justin Fields. They're looking at some other players. And, for teams that are a little more confident in where they are as a rebuilding team, you look at maybe, the Dolphins, for example. I don't think anybody expects them to compete next year, at least at playoff level. And so if they have to wait another year to get the quarterback right, then I think they'd be okay they'd be prepared to do that.
Yeah, that's in the Panthers, definitely 5 and 6, really interesting spots but Chase Young is going to go number 2 or number 3 at this point.
Right.
But where the suspense comes in is if he does go number 2, does Detroit make a trade when they're on the clock? How do we interpret it if they don't? Because you would think, Dane, that if the Miami sells themselves on a quarterback at 5 or Carolina sells themselves on a quarterback at 6 over these prospects that we're talking about, then it's not a large leap to say they would sell themselves on trading up to number 3. It's almost the same question. If you're willing to take them at 5 or 6, you should be willing to give the a third and a fourth, like basically what it shouldn't be, or maybe a second. It's not going to be a crippling cost, especially with what these players did, like Jeffrey Okudah and Isaiah Simmons. Detroit should feel like they can trade down to 5 or 6 and get an equal quality player that they would get at number 3, assuming Chase Young goes at number 2. And if they don't take if they don't trade up to number 3, then we immediately open our mind to the idea of these quarterbacks falling down the board. I want to really quickly, because you mentioned Lamar Jackson. One of the things I love about the draft, really my first love in the whole NFL calendar, is the draft, because the draft gives us the opportunity to have these big picture, large concept discussions, and also the process of evaluating players and being tuned into the league shows the evolution, or maybe lack of evolution, in thinking. You already mentioned Baker Mayfield. 5-10 years ago, the idea of a prospect with Baker Mayfield's profile going number 1 overall is just not even a starter. But you would not even consider it. How much has Lamar Jackson's success opened some of these teams' minds to a Jalen Hurts, to a quarterback where the same profile 5 or 10 years ago, in the same vein as Mayfield, where he said, well, we won't be able to work with that. Now teams seeing maybe that if you commit to that skill set, it can work.
Right. And that's such a big part of it. But using the word commit, looking at what Harbaugh and his staff have done with Lamar Jackson, that's just, if you're going to fully commit to a quarterback that has a unique skill set like that, it's going to pay off. And, there's not a Lamar Jackson in every draft, though. That's, I think we have to really hammer home here. A guy like Jalen Hurts, he is unique. He does certain things that get you excited at the college level, but there's a gap there between what Lamar Jackson does and Jalen Hurts does. And I know that during the season, I was getting messages saying, see what Lamar Jackson's doing? Okay, Jalen Hurts, he's going to go first round. He's going to go number 1 overall now. That's just, there's such a talent discrepancy between the two. And it's not that Jalen Hurts is not talented. He's extremely talented. It's just that Lamar Jackson is that much more talented with what he can do with his arm, with his legs. And his development as a passer does not get enough credit in college. A big reason why I graded him as a late first rounder. It's just because, and I think a lot of other teams did too, and where he ended up being drafted, it's because he was inconsistent as a passer. And yes, you think he can get better, but it's still there's a gap there. And so credit to the Ravens coaches and what they were able to do to develop him. He's still getting better with his accuracy and decision making, especially on throws outside the numbers. Still needs to get better in those areas. But we saw an MVP type of season this past year, unstoppable at times. And it all comes down to the coaching, being able to commit the offense, the play calling, everything around him to put him in position to succeed. And with Jalen Hurts, it just there's a big difference. And so I think Hurts is I see him more as a 4th rounder. I think there's a good chance he could go in the 3rd. I think he's going to go higher than maybe my grade, but I think that he projects as a backup and a guy that can potentially help you. But anybody expecting Lamar Jackson type of impact, I think they're going to be a little disappointed with Hurts.
That's fair. The commitment should be commended, but the success is really a product of Lamar Jackson. Turn the page to the running backs. Here's where I'm getting stuck, Dane. And Jonathan Taylor was fantastic. And I think folks that were watching him closely at Wisconsin would have said it's no surprise that for as big and bulky as he is, he has that straight line speed. He's got some subtlety and nuance to the way he runs. He's not just a blunt force trauma instrument. However, speaking of evolution, it does seem that passing game contributions by a running back are a bigger part of their overall grade than they were, say, 5 or 10 years ago. And that brings into the picture someone like Clyde Edwards-Helaire out of LSU, where Jonathan Taylor, even in college, was not on the field often for passing downs. Do you think that there's still enough old school teams, your Seattle, your Tennessees, that Taylor could be, if not a late first round pick, still the first running back off of the board, or are teams putting more emphasis on passing game contributions? So even after his excellent combine, he still might not be the first running back.
I think both, because even though we did not see him, and credit to Wisconsin, they did a noticeable job trying to get him involved more on passing downs and third downs. Whether mostly as a pass receiver, not as much as a blocker. Still some question marks there. He had a few drops as a junior, but he also had 26 catches, which was triple what he had the year before. So the targets went up, the catches went up, and so I think Wisconsin did try. And I think there's some untapped potential there with Taylor. I don't think he's a bad receiver. I think he's just more of an unproven receiver. And so it's not that he can't do it. It's just that we haven't seen it enough to this point. So I do think there is some untapped potential there for him as a passing back or a guy that can help as a blocker. I think that there is a chance. And I just came out with my 3-round post-combine mock today. And in that mock, he was the first running back drafted. And that's not something that I purposely tried to do going in. I didn't approach it by saying Taylor's going to be the first back drafted. I just kind of going through the teams. It's just, that's how it happened. I think when you look at Detroit in that early second round, they would love to follow the model that the Tennessee Titans put together this past year with riding Derrick Henry and timely offense, but mostly built around the run game. And I think that's what they could potentially do if they drafted a Jonathan Taylor there in the early second round. Try to adapt that mentality, that approach that the Titans showed this past season. I think they have the quarterback to do it. They have enough pieces on defense where they can create turnovers and at least be more competitive in that division. So Jonathan Taylor, if that's how it works out, and it's tough when you do a mock draft and you're going through the first round and you're like, okay, where are these running backs going to fit? Because I think J.K. Dobbins, to me, he's the top running back this year. I think he's worthy of late first round consideration. Jonathan Taylor is worthy of consideration in late first. So is DeAndre Swift. And yet when you look at the teams picking there, and it's kind of hard to figure out where are they going to go? Where's the landing spot? I don't know that there necessarily is one unless we do see a trade up situation. But then in the early second, you got teams like the Lions. I think the Chargers could be in that mix with Melvin Gordon moving on. Even Eckler's been great, but adding another piece to that backfield, especially with the uncertainty at quarterback right now with the Chargers. There's several teams in that second round that could go running back, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if Jonathan Taylor ends up being that first back drafted.
Yeah, and of course, the fantasy football crowd ears perk up when we talk about running backs, but the idea that Detroit could take Taylor, Tampa Bay, I think, is another interesting team to think about with Taylor. The idea that a team just invested in running back over the last few years, even the Chargers with Melvin Gordon, then they're likely to let him walk, but that doesn't mean that they won't invest in running back again. Right. And the Chargers are really interesting to bring up too with Anthony Lynn. I think that he probably would be all for continuing to invest in the backfield. So there's a lot to think about there. Looking at the mock draft that you put up, really, since you mentioned it now, that I'll take a look at it. It looks like the wide receivers, CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy, and it seems like talking about what we've seen from Okudah and the tackles and Simmons, that we're looking at these receivers as maybe a ceiling of number 8. You have them going number 12, number 13, and Ruggs 15. That has been a connection for a while now. Is that basically the ceiling for these wide receivers at this point, just because of the depth at the position, or is it also just the quality of the prospect that they're good, but they're not AJ Green, Julio Jones type of good?
A little both. I mean, I don't think there is a Julio Jones, AJ Green in this class. Calvin Johnson, nothing like that. But these are still it's a really good group, a really good top tier of wide receivers in this class. And it is funny because coming out of the combine, a lot of my conversations that I had, there's a lot of interest around where these receivers are going to go, because a lot of teams are going to look at the depth of the position, second, third, fourth round, and say, yeah, we really do like CeeDee Lamb. We really do like Jerry Jeudy, but we feel really good about the options that are going to be there in the second, third round. And, I'd rather us get our tackle here in the first round. I'd rather get the pass rusher, rather go with another position where maybe it's not as strong in the second, third, fourth round, get the other position now, and then get your receiver on day 2. So how many teams subscribe to that theory? At what point does it become, okay, CeeDee Lamb's just way too good at this point to pass up? And so it's really an interesting wrinkle with this class when you look at the depth of the overall wide receiver group. I think Justin Jefferson out of LSU, if he didn't put his name in that top tier with those three, because I think going into the combine it was all about Lamb, Judy, Ruggs. That's a top three, which I'm on board with. Those are my top three. Would not be surprised at all if any of those three were the first receiver drafted. But Jefferson made a strong case why, if he's not in that top tier, he's at least at the very top of that second tier. Going out there running the 4.43, the field work was impeccable. I mean, the gauntlet's exactly how you want a receiver to perform, catching the football, staying straight on the line, staying balanced, focused, just no stress at all catching the football. And so I think Jefferson's right there in that mix as well. And it's really going to be interesting. I think you look at the top 10. Arizona at 8, maybe you could see maybe reuniting CeeDee Lamb with Kyler Murray. That's a possibility. But if I'm them, I'm going in the mock. I went Tristan Wirfs. Right. I know they lost DJ Humphries, but give me that athletic right tackle and let's protect this quarterback. And you know what? I feel really good about getting a receiver on day 2 if that's the direction I want to go. So it's a worthy debate about which direction teams should go that have a need at receiver. The Raiders at 12, the Colts at 13. I think you could look at the Broncos at 15, maybe the Cowboys, depending on what happens with the Amari Cooper situation. I think he's going to stay in Dallas long term, but if there's some friction there, if they're not able to get a long term deal done and they have to franchise Dak, and there's obviously some dominoes there, then all of a sudden 17 in Dallas, that becomes a strong possibility for one of these wide receivers. So definitely a lot of intrigue with these receivers and where they could end up.
Yeah, it's something that we have to take into account when we're simulating the mindset of a team, like you laid out, that if they're breaking a tie between a receiver and a non-receiver in the first round, right, they're going to like what's at wide receiver in the second round a lot more than those other positions. Again, from a fantasy football mindset, it's exactly the kind of thinking you use. I love the draft, again, as a jumping off point to talk about the state of the league. And I noticed in your mock, you did put Isaiah Simmons number 3. And it does make sense for Simmons, whether it's the Giants, 3, 4, 5, you have Patriots style defense mind in charge of those defenses. Does it make sense now that the league is ready, or even sees it as a positive, that Simmons is versatile, where 5, 10, 15 years ago, a positionless player was a negative?
Right. And that's it. I mean, 15 years ago, we're talking about Isaiah Simmons as a tweener, a guy that doesn't have a natural fit. Where are you going to play him? And maybe a mid to late first round pick at best. And now he's one of the best players in the draft class because of the athletic skill and everything that he can do. I call him a 4-down player because he doesn't have to leave the field. And it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to play him on special teams, but he can do it. I mean, you can keep him on the field in any situation. And I mean, heck, let him play offense. He'd be a heck of a wide receiver. So just make sure he's got a oxygen mask and just keep him on the field at all times. I mean, he's such a fun player, and the ability to blitz him, let him play sideline to sideline, play in the slot, let him drop and cover, and just so many things you can do with him, and things you could prevent the offense doing by trying to get you, catch you in certain personnel mismatches. He really prevents that, and so I think that's going to be awfully appealing to, you look at Detroit, and you better believe Matt Patricia is looking at that type of weapon and saying, man, the things we could do. Even though they drafted a linebacker in the second round last year, they drafted a linebacker in the first round 3 years ago. Even with that, I still think that you can get value out of an Isaiah Simmons, and so that's why I went that direction at 3. But even if he doesn't go 3, I think I don't. 4 with the Giants, I still believe Dave Gettleman, the allure of one of these tackles, I think it's going to be too much, and I think that's the favorite there. But I think Isaiah Simmons certainly will be considered at number 4. At Dolphins with Brian Flores, I think they'd be an awesome fit if they decide to not go with the quarterback at 5. And I think even at 7, the Panthers, Luke Kuechly obviously retiring this offseason. I think that's an organization that even before Matt Rule had kind of a history of taking these kind of versatile linebackers, Thomas Davis and Shaq Thompson. So I think it'd be just a natural fit, especially with Matt Rule, really a forward-thinking type of coach. So it's basically the bottom line is I don't think Isaiah Simmons going to have to wait very long to hear his name called in this draft.
And again, when he's the other side of the scale and one of these quarterbacks who have much more defined known flaws or risks than he does, it may change the equation. Speaking of equations, really quick, you talked about looking ahead to next year's draft, and I just want to ask you this just to get your immediate reaction to it. Actually, before my brain is like just queuing up with questions I want to ask you about really quickly, because you mentioned Dave Gettleman, and I know the draft analysis is your wheelhouse, but I also know that you're at the combine, you're hearing things or you're noticing things. Do you think that, because we're trying to project the Giants and will they trade down or will they take a 320 plus pound player? These are Dave Gettleman meat potatoes, but Joe Judge, at least from some observers' point of view, seemed like he's the sheriff now, and Gettleman is riding shotgun here. So when you're in your mock drafts projecting the Giants, do you still see Gettleman having that final say when they hand in the card?
Well, with any coaching change or, there's always going to be a little bit of a feeling out, regardless of what's been reported, regardless of, what the team might say in terms of who's in charge of, the 53, who's in charge of the game day roster, who's in charge, all these things will be talked about, but sometimes it doesn't hold true. Sometimes, especially if there's a debate in the war room, sometimes we just don't know until it happens who's going to win out. And I think that's going to be true with a lot of these teams. You look at the Cowboys, especially. This is a team that for so long has been, led by Jason Garrett. And now with Mike McCarthy coming in, we know the general manager, Jerry Jones, but this is traditionally the Cowboys have been in a front office that they draft for their coaching staff. And that's why they drafted Taco Charlton over TJ Watt, is because the coaches didn't feel like TJ Watt could put his hand on the ground, which is ludicrous. How it played out is kind of how we expected to play out to the Steelers' advantage with Watt. And so, I think it's, but there's going to be a feeling out period in terms of, how much of a say will McCarthy have in that war room? And I think it's no different in New York, and where you have a very headstrong general manager like Gettleman, who has a very set way of thinking, and he drafted the quarterback, and so I think it's very evident that he's going to want to protect him as well. Something that they struggled to do last year, and especially, and I think with Joe Judge, what do we know about him? And it's not very much in terms of a track record of evaluation and drafting. And so there's definitely going to be a feeling out period with some of these coaches, some of these front office situations. The Giants definitely are a part of that. I think you look at Carolina with Matt Rule, obviously he's the guy. But still the old staff in the front office, a lot of guys are still there. We have to figure them out. And so with every draft, there's something to learn, and a couple with these organizations, I think we'll learn something, but we might not learn until after the draft, and we kind of figure out who they go with.
Yeah, like you said, it may be a process that plays itself out and resolves itself while they are on the clock. Another question I wanted to ask you, while you mentioned teams looking forward to next year, and a player, I don't know if you saw this, it was reported, actually it was on The Athletic, that it was an interview with Travis Etienne, the running back from Clemson, where he said, I wasn't coming out for a second round grade. And what I have to wonder, Dane, because I was looking up the NFL's own information about the advisory board, and I saw in 2016, they gave out 2 first-round grades and 23 second-round grades. And of course, and they should trumpet this, that they've been 85% accurate between 2010 and 2017. If they handed out a first or second round grade, that the player went in the first or second round. And I think they've even simplified the process that you either get a first round grade, a second round grade, or you should go back to school grade. My question to you is this, and I think some of this is a part of this process that's concealed from us, which is what's their criteria, what kinds of things are they weighing? But at this point, is it likely that any running back is going to get a first round grade from the advisory board?
Yeah, I mean, you would think that, like a guy like Saquon Barkley would.
Yeah.
But and also there are a lot of times where guys like Saquon Barkley, I don't know that he even submitted because, he knew he was going. He didn't really have a decision to make. They could have came back with a go back to school grade, and I think Saquon Barkley still would have won because he felt confident he was one of the better players in that draft. So I do think that, I mean, Travis Etienne, I hope that reading that article, which is a great article up on
Yeah.
The Athletic by Grace, I think it's something that, he did mention his degree, which is important to him, which is great. And I just think talking to people about the decision, it felt like he just wasn't ready. And he even said in the article, like he knew he was coming back, but he waited until the very last deadline, so he didn't have to go to class and just wanted to play video games a few more days. Like, that sounds like a guy that probably should have stayed in school.
Yeah.
And so, but I don't. Hopefully, he's not too disappointed when he comes out next year and he's not just a slam dunk first round grade, because good chance he won't be. And it's not, because what does he have left to do at the college level that he hasn't already
Right.
done, that we haven't already seen? He's already Clemson's all-time leading rusher. Now, sure, he can get better in some areas. He is not a perfect back, and he can improve, but I just don't know. I'm not convinced that there's going to be enough that he could do to be a lock first round pick at this time next year. And maybe he'll prove me wrong. But I think he's right now he's viewed as a top 75 guy, most likely a second rounder, maybe early third. But, I think if he comes back and, it's just going to be more wear and tear on his body. And so I think that might offset anything that he is able to improve on. So bottom line, it's going to be very tough for him to get that first round grade. It's going to be tough for any of these guys to get first round grades to the running back position, unless you are Saquon Barkley and at the top of the heap. But I think more and more teams are kind of thinking along the lines of, hey, unless it's just kind of the final piece that we're missing, probably shouldn't be investing top 10 picks at the running back position.
And I think teams also just see what happened with Todd Gurley's second contract, with David Johnson's second contract. And, it's a like candle burning at both ends kind of position. And it's something difficult to, I would hope when a team takes a player in the first round, they plan on that player retiring as a member of their organization. Maybe a little bit tougher with the prudence there. Looking over your mock too. So, I mean, we could spend hours just all the jumping off points from that. I did notice you have Austin Jackson and Ezra Cleveland in the first round at offensive tackle. And I wonder, is this a bit of a sort of a train effect where, because we are likely to see 4 offensive tackles go off the board in the top 12, 15 picks, that teams are going to then take that second tier of offensive tackle? I know Cleveland had a tremendous combine. I'm not sure if the combine isn't the big difference there, but is there an effect, Dane, as you put together, not how you would do the draft if you were making the picks for every team, but how you think the draft will transpire, that when there's a position where there's that early run, it pulls the second tier players up the board a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And especially because the third tier at the position is so lackluster. It's a very top heavy position. We're going to be talking so much about these tackles on day 1 of the draft, and then day 2 and day 3, it's going to be about other positions, because the tackle position, it really thins out. And so, we're going to see 4 tackles go pretty high. And then I don't think we're going to have to wait very long to hear Austin Jackson's name. And then I think Ezra Cleveland's right there. Josh Jones, I think he has a chance to go first round as well. So that's 7 tackles with a legitimate chance to go first round. And Ezra Cleveland, it's not just what he did at the combine, even though that is a big part of it. He did turn heads with the movement skills. But we saw that on tape. He's an athletic player on tape. And I think important context with Cleveland is he had the turf toe in the season opener against Florida State, missed 1 game, played through it the entire season. And so I think to fully understand where Ezra Cleveland is as a prospect, you have to watch his 2018 stuff too. The coaches just rave about him. They love the kid. Just the fact that he played through the injury, didn't shut it down, tried to practice through it, just loves football, loves the grind. That's a big part of him. And I think, one of the more important numbers as well was the arm length. I think that was a big concern, is does he have to move inside to guard, because he's got 32-inch arms, 33.5-inch arms, which is a more than passable number for him. So I think he's right there in that first round mix. If not the first round, I could see him coming off the board, first pick in the second round with the Bengals, or not too long after. So Cleveland, definitely one of the winners, leaving Indianapolis. But again, it's all about the tape as well. He has really good tape, and he was already in the early second round mix going into Indianapolis. So
Right.
not a huge jump, but definitely one of the winners.
Yeah, and I wanted to just open up the floor to the idea of other winners, but just more again of a big picture topic.
Mm,
Because as you mentioned, the idea that Cleveland got himself into the first round from the combine isn't something where you're exaggerating the importance of the combine, but where the importance might be exaggerated is he's just jumping from the early second to the late first. So do we still, compared to what the league does, do we still exaggerate how much the combine can move the needle? Of course, there are always exceptions, but for the most part, is the range of movement from the combine smaller than what we imagine?
I think it's where I think the combine can really, especially with these testing. I mean, the medicals and interviews, obviously, that's a different conversation
Sure.
because that can really, drop a guy or, whatever. But when it comes to just the on-field stuff, I think where it could really be valuable is be a cluster buster. You take at the wide receiver position. I mentioned Justin Jefferson, who I thought put himself at the top of that second tier, maybe even in that top tier for some teams. Another guy, Denzel Mims out of Baylor. He's kind of taking the Terry McLaurin path, crushed the Senior Bowl, goes to the combine, crushes it there. And I think that's something where, okay, maybe all of a sudden, instead of Mims kind of being log jammed with guys like Brian Edwards and Michael Pittman and some of these other receivers, all of a sudden Mims, it's cluster buster where you're going to take the guy with the better numbers at the combine with the better athletic profile, and you're going to bet on that's kind of going to be the tiebreaker. And so that's where I think it could really help some of these guys, especially a guy like Mims who just tested off the charts. He caught everything, looked great doing it. He's going to be a popular guy this spring with these 30 visits and at the pro day, things like that. And so, I think you look at, in my mock draft, he went above guys like T. Higgins and Rager and Chenault. And so I think that maybe we weren't talking about that a month ago, but now I think it's a realistic possibility. So you've seen these guys. I mean, do you think Mims is, worthy of, the bump up after his combine performance?
Yeah, well, I think it's momentum. And I think that with Chenault, with Higgins, they're not building any momentum right now.
Right.
And that's something that I think is a worthy way to sort these guys out. But I like the way you have this term cluster buster, that these players sort themselves out within a tier. It helps give teams clarity. One thing I haven't heard you mention, by the way, I see some idea out there that maybe we should put a little less weight on the combine this year than previous years because of the change in the schedule, because of the waiting around, because of the drills happening in the afternoon or evening. How much do you think that changed the validity of the results that we got?
I think that it's something that you can't just dismiss it because, some guys are running their 3 cones at 10 o'clock at night, and that's a long day. It's, I was talking to Mekhi Becton's trainer, and he was saying how, he was doing something else, and all of a sudden there's, a schedule change with the bench press, and some guys weren't doing it. So it's kind of like, okay, Becton, you're up. And he didn't have time to prepare. And, he still was able to get 23 reps, which is impressive for a guy with, 50-inch arms. But, he was, the schedule was so disjointed this year that everybody was catching up. So, trainers and the players themselves, the teams, the coaches, they were making changes on the fly this year. So, it's something that it's validity is something that you don't want to question when, we pay so much attention to these numbers. But I do think that it's open for discussion in terms of, how much should we, comparing in the past years and, guys paying attention to the guys that opted not to run, maybe being a little more lenient on those decisions compared to, some of the guys that did, and maybe even being more impressed with the guys that were, tested off the charts. So there's so many different ways to digest the numbers at the combine every year, but especially this year with the disjointed schedule, the later times, it is really something that it's just another wrinkle to this process, and it's not going back. I mean, once they made this move to primetime, I think you could pretty much bet it's going to be like this for a while. And who knows? Maybe when the combine goes to LA, unfortunately, because I wish it would stay in Indianapolis. But the argument will be, well, yeah, the times and stuff are going to be at night, but it's going to be on the West Coast. So even though it's happening at 8 o'clock in Eastern, it's going to be 5 o'clock, for their body clocks on the West Coast, or whatever. That'll be the excuse. So the combine is constantly evolving, just like the NFL is, and it's not going to stop anytime soon.
Yeah, I like this idea that we should just be more impressed with the players, the competitors, right? Who just say,
Sure.
okay, you want me to do it at 10 o'clock? I'll do it at 10 o'clock. I want to get out there and compete. I want to show out for myself. Looking over your mock, one player who didn't necessarily show out, AJ Epinesa, but still in the first round, a Patriots pick at 23, definitely a Patriots kind of player. Is this a good test case for folks out there that are following this stuff, that the league already has a basic idea of where these players are going to flash and where maybe the cold zones of their athletic profiles are? And that's why, even though from the outside looking in, it might have seemed like a disappointing combine for Epenesa, the edge rusher from Iowa, that he's still a player that the teams that had him in that range of the draft aren't going to move him down. And in fact, I think the name Michael Bennett comes up, and I know it didn't work out, but we'll help Bennett and the Patriots. But it's not necessarily a negative if you're not a twitchy speed rusher, if you can still generate pressure from the interior defensive line on passing downs and be that edge setter. Is that why Epenesa still doesn't move down, even though his combine was perceived as disappointing?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think that each team obviously digests the combine differently. And so the Patriots are going to be one of those teams where they're going to trust their own evaluations more so than some numbers. Now, it will be interesting with Epenesa, what he does at his pro day, because I do think he's going to improve those numbers substantially. I think he'll be under 5 in the 40. I think his 10-yard split will be much improved. And so those numbers will be really important in terms of, how we view him. And then I think those questions for him will be, why the discrepancy? Why were the numbers so unimpressive in Indianapolis, but then here 3 weeks later they're much improved? And so that's something that I'll be interested to hear his answer. Assuming that he does improve on those numbers. But when you watch the film, I mean, he's a guy that the heavy hands, the violence that he plays with, creating his own pass rush lanes. I get it. People that are really skeptical because he did not test well, and he's not a super athletic prospect. That's just not who he is, and he never will be. That's not how he wins. But it's something that, there's still value in what he offers, and being an edge setter and being a guy that creates his own pass rush lanes because of his power. He has savvy to him. It's not just about being stronger than the guy he's going up against. He understands leverage. He understands, how to use his hands, and, all that obviously matters because it's more of a dance than just, am I faster than or stronger than the guy that I'm going up against at the NFL level. Technical skill, because all these guys, pass rusher, offensive line, when they're going at it, they're bigger and they're faster than anything that these guys saw in college. Really, it comes down to technical skill that separates, the winners from the losers. So, I think that Epenesa is a player that's still, he might fall to the second round, very possible. But I still think there will be teams with first round grades on him who will consider him in the first round. Patriots, I think, will definitely be one of them. I think he fits exactly what they do on defense. And, depending on who else is there, there might be someone that they feel is a better player there, and they might go that direction, whether that's, Xavier McKinney, the safety from Alabama, or who knows, one of these quarterbacks. Regardless, I do think that Epenesa will have first-round grades from a few teams and will be considered there on day one.
We have about 10 minutes left in the hour. It always flies by. Usually at the end, we'll kind of go off the rails a little bit, but not totally off the rails, Dane. I want to ask you because, I can recall, it was funny, we were joking before you came on that, you still, the years are treating you well. I feel like you look the same as you did whenever we first ran into each other out on the draft circuit. And you're like, yeah, I was like 16 then. But so you've been doing this for a while. You've been doing this long enough that you have perspective and you've seen a lot of changes. How does this remain fresh for you? year after year, to the way you attack it, it doesn't get stale, it doesn't get boring, because it is so detail driven, because it is such a deep dive every year. How do you maintain your passion and energy for the NFL and the draft?
That's a great question, and I think that um, just I mean I do think I have a genuine passion for this. It started when I was 13 years old and I was watching the draft and just thinking like this is amazing. Like why would a good college player not be a good NFL player, or why would an average college player be a great NFL player? And just as fascinated by the process, and I'm still fascinated by that process because it's not like we've got it figured out. We'll never have it figured out because the draft is not a science. No matter how much people want to try and make it one, it'll never be that. There's too many variables. College football and the NFL, they're both football. They're two different sports. They're so different, and so it's fascinating to me. Just the little things you pick up every year, and some of it's analytically driven. Some of it's certain things you're paying attention to with play style and on the field, and certain things they do with their technique, certain things they do when you're watching them on film. And so I think that's part of it too, is just understanding that we're never going to find that secret sauce, but still striving for it, and
Right.
still thinking like maybe one day we'll figure it out exactly. And so that's part of it. And I think just my favorite part of this whole process is figuring out the journeys these guys come on. There's no two journeys that are the same. Some guys will not play football until their senior years of high school, and then that tells you something, that kind of tells you something about their future. Some of these guys have been playing since they were 4 years old and are lifers, and but every journey's different. And so learning about their journeys, understanding what led them to this point, what contributed to them. Maybe it's playing all these different sports. Ross Blacklock, the defensive tackle from TCU, was saying how being a competitive swimmer, how that helped him. There's so many different wrinkles and details, and that I'm a very detailed driven person, and so I think that this fits me in the way I think. And I think just by being observant, you can learn a lot, and so I really think that fits just kind of me and how I am and my personality. And so for me, that's a great question that I don't think I really think about a lot, or that I've answered very often. So it's definitely making me think as I talk. Yeah. And it's interesting. It's something that I guess I've never had to think about, because I haven't been forced with the do I really still love this, or is it wearing me out, or anything like that. It's just I have a genuine love for this, and doing this draft guide is something that definitely wears me down, because it's so extensive and I put so much into it, and it can be tough, but I know the payoff is absolutely worth it. And so that's something that I'm excited to share with everybody, and I think the fan interest as well. It's only grown in interest. When you talk about the fan perspective, and I think that's part of it too. The more questions I get, it invigorates me, and it helps as well. So I think it's definitely a combination of things that really keeps my passion alive.
I like the way you touched on analytics, and you touched on the way, and the NFL, you mentioned Mike McCarthy already in the show. I thought it was a milestone moment that Mike McCarthy, when he wanted to redo his image, really wanted to put forward how into analytics he was. And that was something that even just a few years ago, we wouldn't have expected. That's a way to like gussy yourself up in the eyes of NFL decision makers. And there's more analytics, and teams are hiring analytics minds. There's the Data Bowl. We've always had the Sloan Sports Conference and all those things. But I like that you ended on the note of the human stories. Someone like Jordan Love and his story of losing his father, and this idea of how there could be a dedication, a focus that could not be obtained in any other way than having to go through that kind of hardship. And it's the soft skills, it's the people skills, it's being able to perceive somebody and really, even in a short period of time, understand the human being, and not so much the amalgamation of athletic qualities and football skills and traits and things like that. That is why it becomes so elusive. But I really love that you said that what keeps you coming back is that we can never really solve it. We could never really know. And those are the puzzles that we get lost in. I think of those mathematic problems that mathematicians spend their whole lives just trying to push the ball down the field a few more yards, knowing that they're not going to be the one that scores the touchdown. And in some ways, that quest for perfect knowledge, even though we know we'll never achieve it, keeps us going. Now, total other side of things, Dane, because obviously you love football. As a fan, what are you most excited about, this crazy offseason with the quarterbacks and the CBAs holding everything up? So we're going to have an avalanche of information, and teams are going to have to act. There's going to be an adrenaline rush because teams are going to have to act on a much shorter timeline than they're used to, I think, with these, between Brady and the CBA and the amount of quarterback uncertainty. As a fan of the game, as someone who's just interested to see what transpires, what are you on the edge of your seat waiting for in the next couple of weeks?
I think it's obviously what's on everybody's mind, but I mean, I have to go with Tom Brady. I love chaos, and I think that I never even considered Tom Brady playing for another team, another franchise. And
are you considering it now? I mean, both as an analyst who was at the combine, as someone who's just watching it and using your intuition to know what's possible.
I'm still leaning towards he's going to be a Patriot just because I'm not there. I can't get my mind past that. But there was a lot more buzz in Indianapolis about him playing elsewhere than I considered. And so I'm more open to it than I was. But I'm still not ready to go full on and say, I think there's a better chance that he's going to be back in New England than I do going elsewhere, whether it's the Titans or, there's 49ers rumors out there. I mean, who knows? I'd be shocked if he's going to play anywhere except the Patriots. But I have no basis for that. I have no inside information about where Tom Brady's going to play. It's hard for me to see it happen. But with that said, I'm all here for the chaos. I'm all here for it. And I'm here for the fun. And, the NFL offseason drives, the news cycle as much as any other sport in season. So I'm here for it. It should be a lot of fun to see how it plays out. And, even if he does go back to New England, it's going to provide us with a lot of different storylines here the next few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't remember who it was that said this, but I had opined this a few days ago, that maybe what's going on here and why it feels so elusive is that Tom Brady himself doesn't know right now where he's going to play. Yeah. That he's still in the process of weighing all of these things. And of course, the Patriots haven't made their pitch yet. So that's a variable that hasn't been filled in, and then the rest of the league waits, and that's exciting. Out of all the rest of the quarterbacks that are out there, is there a particular quarterback that you'll applaud the team that gets Teddy Bridgewater or trades for Andy Dalton or what have you, or a quarterback that you're saying, oh, whoever signs Jameis Winston, good luck. I mean, I think you see what you're getting. Do you have any strong opinions about all the other quarterbacks who we're wondering about over the next couple of weeks?
I think I'm really interested to see what the Bears do, because I think that obviously this is a make or break year for Trubisky. But what type of approach do the Bears take? Do they add a quarterback who has a legitimate chance to maybe upstage Trubisky and take over as a starter? Is that the direction they want to go? Do they want to go with a competitor? Because maybe that's what Trubisky needs. Maybe he needs someone that's going to be, trying to pass him on the depth chart to get that a little bit more out of him on the field. Or do they go the more passive route and go with a non-threatening quarterback who's a career backup who, maybe they feel like, okay, we don't want to mess with the psyche. We don't want to mess with, we don't want to give him something else to worry about and say, okay, we're going to go with the non-threatening quarterback that we add to the mix. So I'm interested to see what the Bears do, which direction they go with, and then to see how it plays out. If they go with the threatening quarterback, a guy like, I don't know. I mean, maybe they add, I guess, I don't know. Marcus Mariota is not really a threatening quarterback.
He's the passive. When you said passive and non-threatening,
right.
I pictured Marcus Mariota, wonderful human being anyway.
Right, exactly. So, do they go with a guy like that who, is obviously different than adding, one of these other different quarterbacks? And so I think what the Bears do with Trubisky, and to see how they kind of accommodate him, or they do they go with the more aggressive approach and try to push him? And if it doesn't work, okay, well then maybe we have this quarterback take over and we try to salvage our season. So a lot riding on the quarterback decision for Ryan Pace and that front office. So eager to see what they do.
Yeah, well, and they have to see what happened in Tennessee last year and the burden lifted
Exactly.
from the team when they feel like now we have a chance to win. Look, never passive, always aggressive. Dane Brugler, DP Brugler on Twitter. The Athletic. Again, if you love the draft, a reason to subscribe to the Athletic alone to get all of the great insight. Thank you, folks. The couch is back, and we'll be back through the rest of the year. Always. And this is Dane, thank you for your valuable time. This is one of my favorite rituals. It means we are back and it's draft season, and we love you always, football guys, folks. Stay classy.